Evening. This is the Week in Review, and I am your host, Mamadou Mboj, sitting in for Adi Darame this week. And also sitting in for me, if one can put it that way, is my colleague, Mr. Ansumane Eso Nyasi. So welcome to the program.
Thank you, Mr. Mboj. It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And also in the studio with us is our sign language interpreter, Mr. Laming Sonko. Well, our regular viewers, of course, understand the format. We take 10 headline stories, and of course, it could have been more, but we are constrained by time, so we could only take 10, and we go into them into some depth. And some of the stories that we had in the past week, well, the Vice President launched what they call the NDCs, the Nationally Determined Contributions. These are the commitments that countries make towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's one of the stories we have. Also, the Ministry of Information held its fortnightly briefing with the press, and we'll go into some of the announcements that were made. And Kaipa also launched an e-market platform called Gamlumo. We'll go into some of the talking points there. And the Paris Olympics opened on Friday, and we've got 7 athletes representing the country. Today, those stories and many, many more on the Week in Review. But we will kick off with a recent report by a few of the UN agencies about poverty. Apparently, poverty is exploding around the world, and Africa particularly bears a disproportionate burden of it. Let's just listen to this one.
The United Nations goal of ending world hunger by 2030 appears increasingly difficult to reach as wars, climate change, and economic crisis take their toll, according to a report released on Wednesday. The alarming report, compiled by the Rome-based Food and Agriculture Organization, the UN's International Fund for Agricultural Development, the UN's Children's Fund UNICEF, the World Health Organization, and World Food Programme, was presented for the upcoming G20 summit in Brazil, and suggested that a reform of financing food security and nutrition was required to reduce global hunger. Humanity is at a worse situation today than 9 years ago, when the drive to eradicate hunger by 2030 was launched, as challenges such as climate change and regional wars had grown more severe than envisaged a decade ago.
That was QTV correspondent Lena Igwenyuba. Quite staggering there, Mr. Nyasi. Humanity is at a worse situation now than 9 years ago. And when you put it against the background of what we've been hearing on the other side of the ledger, that wealth has been growing. When you take the top few, multi-billion have been piling up money, but the poverty level has been quite astonishing, really.
Yeah, quite astonishing. I think that if you look at the figures, it's quite concerning as well. And if anything, I think it shows that more needs to be done to ensuring that, food in particular is available, but also is accessible. She mentioned ongoing wars, regional wars. She also mentioned climate change and all these things. But I think it's quite alarming that these figures we're looking at, especially in Africa, that 1 in every 5, I mean, it's quite alarming.
That's really. 1 in 5 people.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
It's quite alarming.
Yes.
And then, in light of all these things that are going on, especially, in our continent, the war in Sudan, you're talking about millions of people, having to deal with hunger every day. You talk about starvation, and we know that, a very large number of the population in Africa relies on agriculture, subsistence farming in particular, and the fact that you have all these wars ongoing, but also climate change. In Gambia, we are now in the rainy season, but I mean, there's not been really much rainfall compared to maybe 8-9 years ago.
Even though they've said that we'll probably have an above average this year, Well, August
but you
is
look
yet
at the
to
time.
come, September.
Yeah.
Perhaps we might even have rain until October or November.
Yeah,
you just never know. All the
yeah.
patterns appear to be shifting.
Possibly. So usually farmers would, start working on their farms, early June. Unfortunately, of course, in anticipation of the rains, which would usually, often start, end of June. But this year, I think in the past 2-3 years, we've really experienced this late start to the rains, and it also affects, their production in some way. But overall, I think the numbers are alarming, and for me, what Africa needs, Africa in particular, I mean, of course, I understand the global figures, but what we need in Africa is deliberate policy on these things, but also governments need to take action, not just talk, but walk the talk. We have all these very fine domestic instruments, well polished. At the end of the day, not much is really done. If you look at how much, most governments in Africa have achieved when it comes to, actualizing some of these, domestic plans they have to ensuring that food security and all those things, you would be shocked.
That's absolutely so, but so here we have to put this, isn't it, into context globally, especially since COVID-19, isn't it? And then how that disrupted trade, and even afterwards the war in Ukraine, that also added to it. So really, what we're beginning to see is that we are just so vulnerable to external events, perhaps the whole world, because of the interdependence.
Yeah.
We are really vulnerable to what's happening globally, the big stuff. Then you begin to wonder, what space do I have to navigate, so that I can try to mitigate the worst effects of it? So what can we do, given our heavy dependence on the external world? We don't control that. So then you begin to wonder, what is it you can do? It's a very curious situation.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a very important, interesting point. I think for me the key word there is dependence. How do we do away with that? And so what we need for us as a continent, we've got the land, we've got, the natural space to be able to do that compared to other parts of the world. I think what Africa needs is to invest more into our agricultural sector, but also, find ways to mechanize, to institutionalize mechanized agriculture, because what we have is we have quite, a large number of our population who are into agriculture, but most of them is just subsistence farming. You farm to survive, or maybe produce a very little, sell some, eat the rest, and that's it.
I think about 70% of employment really is in the agricultural sector.
So once you are able to address that, not only would you address food insecurity, but even other sectors. I mean, you talk about unemployment, you talk about irregular migration. We have so many young people, who are into agriculture. But how do we maintain them in there such that they would gain employment, but the population in general would also be able to, have enough food, but also the business aspect of it as well. The entire sector. I think the opportunities are there, but there has to be deliberate efforts to actualizing this.
Just one more thing, maybe very quickly.
Yeah.
How do you see the role of journalism in this battle against poverty?
Very central, very central. So I think we, can serve as very strong advocates, or perhaps maybe in some way influencing policy. By that I mean, putting more attention to how important the agricultural sector is, and how, through our stories, we would be able to really portray the impact that, the agricultural sector can have on all of us. By that I mean, if we're doing stories, that are showing people who are doing quite well in agriculture, or perhaps if this and this and this is available, we would see this shift, wherein all of us would benefit. Maybe somehow that would also influence government policy and government direction towards, agriculture. And I think this is important. We also have a role to play in this, not only to inform, but also serve as advocates for agriculture.
Thank you very much there, Mr. Asmani. So, yes, now to our next story. The Vice President launched what we call the Nationally Determined Contributions. These are the commitments that governments make to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Here, let's just listen to the Vice President.
This momentous occasion is not merely a ceremonial event. Rather, it symbolizes our nation's unwavering commitment to fighting climate change and securing a sustainable and prosperous future for all. Like many developing countries, the Gambia is an insignificant emitter globally of greenhouse gases, contributing less than 0.01% annually. However, we are one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change.
And we just heard there our Vice President, Mohamed Jallow. Quite extraordinary, isn't it? Contributing less than 0.01%.
Yeah.
But you stand to lose so much. You know, the potential consequences, devastating consequences that could befall us.
I think it all comes down to the vulnerability, to our vulnerability that we were talking about just a moment ago. So I recall I covered this one, and the head of the global partners for these NDCs had actually really praised the Gambia and our efforts to ensuring that, you know, there is more global attention to how developing countries like Gambia are having to face the brunt of the greenhouse emissions. You know, even though we contribute less to these emissions. But I have to say, being Gambian, I think it's a good feeling to have international partners, including the UN, saying that Gambia, when it comes to Africa, Gambia is a leader when it comes to fighting, you know, climate change, ensuring that we have all these national instruments, but also, you know, they think government is taking action to ensuring that these things are dealt with, but are also inviting partners to support our national efforts in dealing with climate change and its impacts. I have to say there is a history to this. We know we had a president who was very passionate about environmental conservation. You know, we know of the Banjul Declaration. So I think
1977.
yeah, exactly. So there's so much we can really be proud of nationally of the efforts that we're making to you know, in our collective fight against the impacts of climate change. However, there are challenges as well. And remember, this is the second NDC that government is launching in the past 5 years. So it is to end in 2030. And hopefully in 2026, I understand, the third one would be launched. So how do we know if we've, you know, achieved, you know, how much have we achieved in the first one and this one as well? Maybe the technicians can help us in that. But from what I gathered at the event, you know, from the Vice President, the Minister, and even the UN, you know, representative who was there, Gambia has over the years, you know, done more, you know, more than the rest of, you know, Africa, and I think that for me is quite a good start.
Absolutely. So I'll take that to be sort of the official version.
Yeah.
Of course, we've met our Paris Accords, isn't it? The
Paris,
benchmark.
yeah, climate accord.
So yeah. So, but then one can. How do you respond to this argument that really, what are some of our vulnerabilities? We've seen during the rainy season floods in certain areas. People are building in areas that they shouldn't.
Waterways,
you know,
yeah.
waterways and stuff like that. And the deforestation, all of these. Are we doing enough in areas that we can do something about? Because when it comes to the broader picture, already mentioned, we contribute less than 0.01.
Yeah.
So that's easy to fulfill in many ways. But have you tried to build resilience? And that's really what we need to go into. Have we tried to build resilience into our system When it comes to lands, there are some areas we shouldn't. Are we going to resettle people? The difficult legwork of how things are on the ground. How are we doing there, Mr. Nyasi?
In all honesty, I think this is where the problem is for us. I don't think we're doing really enough in those areas, especially on the issue of land. We know there are several settlements in this country that are very prone to natural disasters like flooding, you know, even within the Greater Banjul area. It's the same story every year, but over here is just talk, you know, but not really much action. I mean, you talk about relocating people. I can tell you, it's one thing you hardly hear, you know, authorities talk about, and I think this is very important. It's one way to deal with these problems. I remember last year I was in Jabang when they were demolishing some of the structures that were constructed on waterways, and I was there year before last, the previous year, and I can tell you the entire place was flooded and people had to leave their homes. But when they were last year, when they demolished some of those structures, we haven't had, you know, much problems in those areas. And I think that is something that really we need to look into. But yeah, in all honesty, we really have not been doing much in those areas.
And you worry that we've not been systematic in this. So it appears as if you don't have a sustainable long-term plan. It's just that once in a while we come with operation this or operation that. After a while, and then that's it. But this is really what we have, what we can do. Because with the global picture, we don't emit much. We are sort of insignificant, but disproportionately suffering the consequences of it. So how do I strengthen myself? How do I adapt, isn't it, in a sustainable way? And these are the small, simple efforts that we have to put in. They all add up. When you put them together cumulatively, they add up to something looking like a solid, credible barriers.
And interestingly, if you look at our domestic policies or perhaps instruments on how to go about addressing some of these problems that you've highlighted, there are very strong recommendations. So basically, we have an idea what should be done, but the problem we have is enforcement, or perhaps should I say implementing these recommendations so that we don't have to go through the same problems year in, year out. Unfortunately, you know, we just talk, but not much is really being done. And I think until then, we will keep experiencing the same problems.
That's it, and we'll keep telling them all the time in such programs. Thank you very much there, Mr. Ismaila Essoe Nyasi. Now to our next story. Well, the Minister really of Information, Dr. Ismaila Ceesay, I think since he took over, he's been having fortnightly briefings with the press. Let's just listen to this clip here.
The ICJ accepted the Gambia's arguments that Israel's occupation is illegal as it violates Palestine's right to self-determination, and it constitutes a regime of apartheid and breaches international law governing the use of force. The court also ruled that Israel's legislation and measures create and maintain a near complete separation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem.
That's the minister. Well, to be fair to the government, because before even he came, they had sort of held regular meetings with the press, didn't they? But did it fizzle out after a while?
Yeah.
Until Dr. Ceesay came in and appears to have reinvigorated it. How do you see it?
I think they stopped after about 2 or 3 months. That was stopped. I understand. I remember even the presidency were having these press engagements quite often. You know, his predecessor as well, the former information minister, but they stopped at some point. But he, you know, has been very consistent, and I have to say that it's one of those, you know, things that this government has done that, you know, we haven't been used to, you know. But I think it's a good thing. I think it's a very, very good thing. the fact that it would not only help close that communication gap between the public and government, but it also gives the press that opportunity to be able to, ask questions. We know it's always difficult. It used to be very, very difficult. Hardly do you even have government agencies, available for interviews. So this, for me, I think is very good. And the fact that he invites government institutions and, senior government officials who are, very much involved in some of these things, invites them over, to have those engagements with the press, but also to share very relevant information with members of the public. I think for me it's a very good initiative.
That's it, and it appears as if he is the supremo of the implementation of the access to information, isn't it? Yeah. Really, he is the supremo of this implementation team. So let's go into some of the things that were said, some of the pronouncements. Yeah. For instance, the ICJ and the war in Israel and the occupation of West Bank, illegal. And it seems we are with the Palestinians here. I covered this one too. Yeah. So you had his updates on the ICJ, on the Gambia's position that was presented to the ICJ, the ICJ's response. Also, we had the Director General of PURA, who gave an update of some of the things they're doing, including, some radio stations whose licenses the authority had threatened to, revoke. But also the Ministry of Justice also gave an update on the position of the ECOWAS Parliament as regards to establishing a special tribunal to prosecuting Jammeh-era crimes. So we start with the ICJ quickly. So he gave an update that the ICJ had accepted Gambia's position, and we know what our position is. Gambia, of course, as chair of the OIC, had presented its position to the International Court of Justice to say that Israel's occupation of the Gaza Strip is illegal, and also that the war should end, and that Palestine reserves that right to self-determination, the usual arguments. Yeah. I think for me it's quite significant. Small Gambia really leading calls for a ceasefire, but also for that global acknowledgement of Palestine as a state. I think it's quite significant. As for PURA, so the update is that, one, they've got so many programs ongoing. They're also working on the infrastructure, including that our national number would be increased from 7 to 9 digits. I look forward to that. We know we're used to the 7 digits. Absolutely, with our phone numbers.
So it's going to increase, likely by the end of the year, to 9. But they're saying this is in line with international, standards and require. Yeah. So and the other one is on the radio stations that I mentioned. So there are some radio stations, who haven't, regularized their status, and they're asking them to do so. Otherwise, their license would be revoked. I understand a few days ago, actually, after this press briefing, 5 radio stations have had their licenses revoked. And there are the rest of them, I think there are over 10 of them, and the rest are working on regularizing their status. They've already started. So I guess that is why. But 5 have already been revoked.
Very quickly, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, it's important. I'm not sure if they had given them maybe a grace period to say you have to regularize your status. And
apparently they did.
Yes. So if they did, well, it's a law and it has to be enforced. And I hope that these radio stations who've had their licenses revoked would work on regularizing their status. Go back to the authority, make sure that whatever requirements there are, you fulfill those requirements, and then they can get back to work. And the final one is the Ministry of Justice. We understand that the ECOWAS Parliament had rejected the proposal that they sent. So they're saying Gambia should work on establishing a special tribunal, internally. They don't want ECOWAS involved, but then the Solicitor General is saying that they are still hopeful that ECOWAS, would still be involved, because the Council of Ministers, but also the Council of the Heads of States are the ones, they would have the final say. But as far as the ECOWAS Parliament is concerned, that proposal was rejected. They don't want the regional body really involving in this.
Absolutely. That in itself was quite an interesting decision by ECOWAS, especially given that in recent years they've been emphasizing on good governance. Whenever you have military takeovers, they would suspend that one, and sort of appearing to be very interventionist. Certainly in our case, they came in and the like, but suddenly maybe they've decided to stop, not to get too much involved in certain internal politics. And in many ways, that's good for ECOWAS. Understanding where to step in and where to stand back.
So what ECOWAS, or the Parliament is saying is, you can establish your own special tribunal, and, we would help, wherein we can, but we're not going to take that lead to say this is ECOWAS leading this, because they understand that this is quite complex, and in light of all that is going on now within the region, all these military coups, the political stuff going on within the region, they think it's better for Gambia to lead, and then ECOWAS would come in and help, wherever possible. But they don't want ECOWAS really leading the establishment of the special tribunal. And I think we've heard this even, after the TRRC submitted its final report to the head of state, that for us to be able to prosecute some of these, very heinous Jammeh-era crimes, we would really need, outside support, especially within the region. And now that we have the ECOWAS Parliament pushing back, I think maybe we would need to, look into that as well. It could serve as a challenge.
Absolutely. If ECOWAS cannot provide it, we can go to other bodies. There are so many bodies around the world.
I remember one of the parliamentarians was like, maybe you should see the ICJ or some other international body.
Of course. Well, we can never really exhaust all the points that came up, during the briefing, so we have to move on. Thank you very much there, Mr. Nyasi. Now to our next story. The two armed forces from the Gambia and Senegal held a committee meeting during the week. Here, let's just listen to our Minister of Defense.
Numerous bilateral agreements and memoranda have been signed on various sectors of our economy. But on the defense and security sector, notably, the agreement on defense and security cooperation between the Republic of the Gambia and the Republic of Senegal, which was signed in March 2017. The protocol on the operational arrangements for the implementation of the right to cross-border hot pursuit and the joint or combined patrols, this protocol agreement was also signed in September 2018. These agreements and protocols seek to further strengthen the bilateral relations between our two countries on the basis of mutual understanding and respect.
That was our Minister of Defense, Serigne Modou Njie. The cross-border hot pursuit clause, that one, Gambians, a good number of Gambians have not been comfortable with that.
I think it's been the most controversial agreement we've had, really, with our neighbors over the years. And we've had reports of the Senegalese, soldiers, crossing over to Gambia, arresting, in some cases, even people who allegedly are Gambian citizens. We've had also reports of Gambian citizens who've been, shot in Gambia, within Gambian territory by Senegalese soldiers who've had to cross over, and most of this happens around villages within the border, and I think this is one of the reasons why you have so many Gambians who are very uncomfortable with this agreement. But then I think our relationship with Senegal over the years has been in a good place compared to maybe 15, 20 years ago, especially during the Jammeh era. Really, we've had quite a tough relationship, and given our geographical the proximity, you look at the relationship we have and how close we are, I think that for me was a very uncomfortable relationship we had. However, yes, now we have a very close relationship, quite a steady one politically, but agreements like the cross-border hot pursuit, I think is one of those that you're quite right, many Gambians are very uncomfortable with.
That's it. And really, we must go sort of beyond Jammeh's era and see what it was like with Sadauda, because we had there 30 years.
Yeah.
But as early as really 1966, perhaps even before, Sadauda was always worried about Senegal's designs, really what they wanted to happen. They really wanted us to be a federation, really.
Yeah.
They wanted us to be that. So what I'm saying is that we've always had tension here and there.
Mm-hmm.
It is in the nature of being neighbors, as it were. We are condemned by our geography, as it were, to be doing things. So I wonder, but they're a more powerful neighbor. So here I worry so much. How do we conduct our diplomacy?
Mm-hmm.
What should be our strategic, as it were, position in regards to Senegal? More powerful than you are. How do you manipulate circumstances to avoid, any kind of confrontation? Is it in your interest? But there are so many potential points of tension here.
Of course. So I think right now we're relying more on Senegal, and especially when it comes to security, than I think we've ever done at any point in our history. Yes, we had the Confederation. Yes, we had their intervention in '81, but our reliance on Senegal from 2017 to date, I don't think we've ever had it at any point in our history. Yes, others would argue it's an international mission, it's ECOWAS, but we know who are leading that. So, in fact, they have the majority in terms of numbers, in Gambia compared to any other country. But, you talk about tension. Just recently, the Ministry of Trade and the GRA have had, several trips to Dakar in a bid to diffuse that tension, within our trade, we know it's difficult doing trade between these two countries. So politically, yes, but there are issues in there that really, have potential for tension. But it's quite difficult, really.
In many ways. So one point is really this, that given the circumstance, I'm not sure whether perhaps the foreign minister has probably thought about it, given the circumstances, what should be our strategic position with them? You don't have, it's a much bigger country. Yeah. So how do you deal with it? We saw Sadauda was always playing this card of we are brothers, we are one family and all of that, but we want to be sovereign.
Yeah.
See, that was the key. He really emphasized on that.
Yeah.
Hadn't it been for Sadauda, possibly we would have merged with Senegal, as many people wanted.
Yeah.
So that was his strategy. Always trying to encourage good relationship, but we are sovereign and stuff like that. Right now, it appears as if a lot of people are questioning that because of the Senegalese, their presence in here, and this hot pursuit, and in the Fonyi areas, we are hearing all sorts of things. So perhaps that is the worry for a lot of people.
Well, I think Sadauda's strategy really works for us for me, I think it works for us more than any other strategy we may employ in our relationship with Senegal. Yes, we have this very close relationship traditionally in terms of religion, but when politically, I think that is something Gambia should always insist on. Our sovereignty, no compromise on that. Yes, we can have this very cordial relationship as neighbors. We can share a lot of things, but when it comes to our sovereignty, it's a no-no. And I think for me, that strategy works for us more than any other strategy we may employ.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nyasi. Now to our fifth story. Well, in the past few years, really, the emphasis has been on increasing female participation in the sciences or in higher education. Let's just take a look at this clip and then afterwards discuss some of the issues raised.
You look at the representation at the level of basic and secondary, especially at the secondary level. You know, they are slightly, you know, above the male gender. The question is, where are they? When they leave that space, where do they go to? You know, so the ministry together with the World Bank have this feeling that we need to look into this, you know, because if we have to have development, we should have the voice of our majority as well as our minority.
That's the Permanent Secretary, Mo Hurst. Quite interesting stats there. In secondary school, we've got more women, girls, but again, afterwards, they all begin to sort of drop off. What happens there? Where do they go during that space, the period?
So I think there are so many contributing factors to this, especially understanding or given our social dynamics. I think they play a lot into this. You have a lot of young girls who, after maybe even secondary school, junior school mostly, out of maybe every 10, you would have a good number that wouldn't proceed to high school, or even only very few would be lucky enough to go all the way to maybe university or college, or maybe attend some form of tertiary education. And I think for me this is a problem. So, you know, so many social factors really contribute to this, including early marriage, but also I think one important factor that we mostly overlook, I think, is poverty as well. If, for instance, you happen to find yourself in a family where, let's say you're two, and then you have a boy and a girl, and the family is having to choose who to pay for, you know, to pursue further education, they would rather pay for the male child. And for me, I think this is one problem we have. And you have this, you know, especially in the provinces. So once you get to junior school and your family cannot afford to, you know, pay your school fees anymore, they just marry you off. And it's a problem. It's really a problem.
So you're saying here essentially it is a matter of the luck of the draw.
Yeah, yeah.
The family you're born into is just as simple as that. Whereas ideally, it should have been every child's right.
Right.
You know what I mean, to go through.
And you know what, so the reason why I think we have more numbers, especially in primary school, is because it's free education for the girl child at that level. So it's really not much of a burden for the family. But once you get to, you know, the higher level, as in secondary school or high school, and then the family is now having to, you know, spend, it gets to this point where if you don't have a family that really understands the value of education, or, you know, really wants to see you go through school, and maybe even up to university or college, you know, it's always difficult. I think for me, this is one of the main problems we have. But poverty certainly contributes to this as well.
Absolutely. So in our story there, we've got all sorts of funds, as it were, for this purpose, to increase women's participation in higher education and the like. Fantastic, yeah? So it depends on how we spend it.
Yeah.
And there are other requirements. Finance is just one aspect, but again, the quality of education they're going to have, and then the like, there will be other consideration as well.
Sure.
So it will take a whole chain of events to really make it work, isn't it?
Oh yes, oh yes. And you know, you've touched on a very important point there, quality of education. This for me is something I always insist on. I think it's very important. So during the common entrance days, you know, look, my mom would, you know, used to tell me that during their time when, you know, a primary 6, you know, student writes a letter, you know, compared to maybe what a high school student would write now, he said, you know, you cannot even compare. I mean, he usually says that. And for me, you know, I don't know, but I think we must have lost it somewhere. And we have to really look back at, you know, some of these things and see where we lost it. What the standards were back then, what is it that we were doing right, you know, that we're not doing now, you know, and hopefully things will change. I mean, because with quality education, with a very strong education system that produces the very best, I mean, of course, we would thrive as a nation. Because for me, it's the backbone. You talk about nurses, you talk about, I mean, it's across all sectors. I mean, across all professions. So when you have people, you know, who are very good intellectually, you know, there is, the end results will always be quality. Unfortunately, it's really been quite rocky for us.
Exactly, and when you look at the stats, the picture is really quite mixed. Of course, you have a lot more of people going to school, but when you look at learning outcomes, we're not scoring too highly with that. Thank you very much there, So we'll go for a short break.
The future is now. With QCell's 5G network, experience speeds like never before with our new 5G Rocket Fixed Internet plan. Get speeds from 10 Mbps to 100 Mbps. Your 5G-enabled devices. Walk into QCell headquarters to get one of our 5G routers and experience the true feeling of 5G. Only with QCell. QCell brings you the future, tech, innovation, incredible speed. The future is now. For more information, call our customer care on 111. QCell, Sunyabus. We innovate, others follow. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back from that short break. If you're just joining us, you've missed 5 stories, but never mind, we've got 5 more to go. And I've got Ansumana Esonyasi here to sort of crunch, isn't it? Factual crunching, what is it? We're crunching facts. I know that in numbers, they crunch numbers, but here, what are we crunching here? Yeah. To our next story, during the week, the Ministry of Health provided training on AMR. Let's just take a look at this.
I will not say we are at 0, but we are at a very low percentage in terms of providing microbiology service across the country. We all know that we have only few facilities that are providing basic, I will call it basic microbiology service, which in fact are very limited. And then as a country, we could do better. The request for this fund to conduct these activities is based on data and is based on a justification of the simple fact that we are far behind in terms of microbiology service delivery in our facilities.
That's it. There, we are far behind.
Far behind.
You know, the services that we should be offering. And these antimicrobials, it's quite interesting that for many years now, we've heard from experts telling us that there are certain pathogens that are becoming resistant to antibiotics. What do we do? It's a very important
Yeah, I mean,
area.
just listening to him, I think it's quite concerning that we have very few, really very few health facilities that are offering this service. And even where the service is available, you're not really getting the very best of it. I think it's quite concerning. So trainings like this, very important because it would help, enhance the capacities of these professionals who are involved in, who provide these services. We know our health facilities really, are under-resourced in terms of equipment, in terms of medication, so to have our health personnel trained in some of these specialized areas, I think is very important.
That's it, that part of training, and I was also thinking about the other part, because we understand that the situation is really brought about because of misuse or overuse of antibiotics.
Possibly.
So you say, how can we, as ordinary citizens, knowing this, what is it that, one can do? So we should be scientifically literate or medically. How do you create medically literate citizens? It's important.
It really amazes me how people would, choose to self-medicate instead of, seeking help from a health professional. This is one place where if I have a headache, never mind whether the headache, whatever is causing the headache, I'll just go get painkillers and I'll take them. And I think for me, this is dangerous, but it amazes me really. And I think it comes down to what you've just highlighted, the need for people to be medically literate. You have to know, what you're using is, but also what quantity should I take? What is this medication for? Unfortunately, I mean, it doesn't happen a lot out here. It's just quite unfortunate.
Absolutely, especially when you consider that, 65–70% of population, they are kids. Yeah. So at the school level, so in the household, even where you have parents, who are illiterate, haven't been to school. Yeah. So you have the children who learned it at school. So that makes a massive difference at home. True. So perhaps tapping into the kids and really thinking about, how to create a medically literate society, that could be very interesting. Yeah. But we can go on till God knows when. Of course. Let's just move on to our next story. During the week in review, GAIPA launched what is called an e-market platform called Gamlumo. Here, let's just listen to the CEO of GAIPA, Mr. Ousseynou Senghor.
Still, we remain, are we ready as a country? Yes, this effort to start the platform is a true manifestation to trade promotion and digitalization as the compelling factors that still remain and will continue to be. To this note, we must accept the fact that the process requires human capacity development and the required material and financial resources to ensuring continuity and support us to the next level where 60% of all Gambian businesses get onto the platform in the next 5 to 10 years.
60% of Gambian businesses in the next 5 to 10 years. Apparently, this is part of a national export strategy, 2021 to 2025.
Quite an ambitious one, I would say, but it's possible. I mean, it's achievable. If really they put in more effort and encourage more businesses to join. We know there's a lot happening online. So many businesses are doing very well thanks to their online presence, and so to have a platform like that, I think it's quite a good innovation, but it will take time, really. This is one place where you have sometimes some very big businesses who hardly have a presence online. And so I think this is a major shift, really, for most of them. But we talk about exports, because all we do is import in this country. So for us to be able to also export some of these services we have, including things that are produced here, in this country, I think it's important that we have an online presence, especially when you have one platform, that is very well coordinated by a body like GAIPA. I think is important.
That's it, and it appears as if any activity that is not prefixed within E is not modern.
It's not modern.
Thank you very much there.
Sure.
Let's go on to our next story. Thank you very much there, Ansumana. In the U.S., yes, I mean, the whole world will be interested in what's going to happen in the U.S. in the November elections. Something dramatic happened in the week. Joe Biden, who until he resigned was being bullish about going to be the candidate for the Democrats, well, things took a dramatic turn. Let's just listen to this.
President Joe Biden, whose extensive political career spans from serving as a U.S. Senator for Delaware to Vice President, has reshaped the U.S. election landscape with his unexpected decision. Despite securing 3,896 pledged delegates during the Democratic primary contest, far surpassing the required number for the nomination, Biden cited personal reasons for his withdrawal.
My fellow Americans, I want to speak to you tonight about the need for us to lower the temperature in our politics. And to remember, while we may disagree, we are not enemies. We're neighbors, we're friends, co-workers, citizens, and most importantly, we're fellow Americans.
Exactly. Let me put it this way. How does American politics look to you from our country, looking over the Atlantic, as it were, looking at American politics? How do you see it?
There's a lot we can really learn from this. We have political leaders who've been heads of their parties. In fact, in Gambia, really, the same political leaders, I mean, people who are appointed as leaders of political parties from the onset, I mean, it's a position you occupy like for eternity. You don't leave. So here you have a president who've secured the required numbers to be able to run for re-election. In the middle of a campaign, making that very difficult decision to leave. You don't see anything like that in Africa, especially in Gambia. So for me, looking at it from afar, from a distance, it amazes me. But I think there are so many positive takeaways, really, from this decision.
Absolutely. So the pressure paid off. Politics should be dynamic. That's how it should be. So it will be interesting. We know that this has sort of reinvigorated the Democratic Party, and it will be interesting because for everybody around the world, Trump would be the nightmare scenario. Let's go on to our final story. We will know how to edit it, but just don't worry. I will edit it. The Paris Olympics. We've got 7 Gambian representatives there, and it opened on Friday. Let's just listen to this.
Gina Mariam Bass Bittey, the Gambia's most accomplished athlete, will lead the country in their 3rd Olympics. Having competed in Rio in 2016, Tokyo 2020, Paris 2024 will be her 3rd consecutive appearance. Gina Mariam Bass Bittey, who signed an endorsement deal with QCell as a brand ambassador 2 weeks ago, is anticipated to continue her great form this season in Paris. She won 2 gold medals at the African Games in Ghana in the 100 meters and 200 meters, and also won 100 meters gold in the African Senior Championship last month.
Absolutely. The Paris Olympics opened on Friday, so there we've got 7 representatives. Should we be disappointed with the number, or it is okay? I'm sure some countries sort of send far fewer.
Yeah, I mean, we would, of course, naturally, we would want to see more, athletes represent us at the Olympics, but I don't think it's about number, given our current situation. However, for Gina Mariam Bas-Biteye, I have to say, really, she goes into these Olympics as the fastest, African athlete, 100 meters. So it's we can all feel the excitement, but I think in terms of numbers, it's not bad.
Absolutely, and she wants to get to the final. That's really what her target is.
Yeah, hopefully
and we've
bring us
got
a medal.
Yes, and she ran sub 11 seconds, which is fantastic, 10 something. Ibrahim Kamara as well, in the 100 meters as well, ran sub 10. Gina ran sub 11, and this one did. And we have the Joduka Fainjai in judo, who would be representing us there. Alassane Anne. Taekwondo, they're all first timers. And in swimming, we've got Usman Job and Aminata Nyabaro. So good luck to all of them. Thank you very much, Ansumana Esonyasi. We've come to the end of this week's week interview. Until next time, I'm going to wish goodbye.